Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Hey, can I show you a story from CTV, which is Canada's largest private broadcaster? Take a look at this. The headline itself gets me, before I even read the story, Ontario's top doctor eyes curfew to curb the spread of COVID-19 as cases surge. Ontario's top doctor, what do they mean by top doctor? Is it the smartest? I know every year the medical schools, they have a gold medalist who got the top score. So is it the smartest doctor? Is that what they mean by top? Is it the tops in terms of, an innovator, a remarkable surgeon who's trying new techniques and really knows? Is that what they mean by top? Maybe tops in terms of customer service, voted by his patients as best bedside manner. Is he a doctor that really makes patients come first? I don't know, there's a lot of ways to mean top doctor, but let me show you what CTV means by top doctor. I'll read a little bit. As case numbers and deaths related to COVID-19 in Ontario climb to new heights, the province's top doctor said that implementing a curfew to prevent transmission of the disease is on the table. That's one of the things we will consider, Dr. David Williams, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health, said Thursday. Oh, that's what they mean by the top doctor. A doctor who doesn't actually have any patients, who doesn't actually care for anyone. What they really mean is a politician with an MD, but not even a politician because no one voted for him and no one can vote him out. He's not accountable in any meaningful way. That's what they mean. I'll read one more sentence. His comments come a day after Quebec announced it would introduce similar action starting this Saturday that could force residents to stay home from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. or risk a fine of up to $6,000. Hey, I got a question for you and a question for our next guest who's standing by. Do you really think that cheaters like Rod Phillips, the former finance minister of Ontario who sneaked away to St. Bart's, or Joe Hargrave, the highway minister in Saskatchewan who sneaked away to the States, or Tracy Allard, the cabinet minister in Alberta who sneaked away to Hawaii, do you really believe that these people who would bring in a curfew, that you can't go out after 8 p.m., do you really think they'd follow it themselves? Joining us now via Skype is our friend Andrew Lawton, the boss of the Andrew Lawton Show, which you can find at andrewlawtonshow.com. Andrew, do you really think that the fancy people, the hobnobbers, the elites, do you really think they're going to be nighty-night lights out at 8 p.m. like the rest of us are going to have to be?
Yeah, I believe it's lights out, but then it's crawling behind the hedges so that a glaring headlight of a police officer doesn't necessarily pick them up. It's funny you mentioned travel because I was looking at the Quebec restrictions, and one of the exemptions to it is if you're headed to an airport or a train station. So if you get busted driving around the streets and you are breaking curfew and they say, where are you going? You can actually say, I'm going to St. Bart's, and that actually gets you out of the curfew, which I find interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about these trips to warm places. And by the way, I used to love going to warm places over Christmas too. I think a lot of Canadians did. It's a bit of a tradition. Folks in the West go to Hawaii, California, Phoenix. Folks in the East go to Florida, the Caribbean. Not everybody, but there were a lot of affordable deals. But you can't do it anymore unless you're part of the ruling lockdown elite, because in addition to, say, like you were going to have a week in the Dominican Republic, let's say, okay, but now you have to be able to afford 2 weeks of quarantine upon your return. So who has 3 weeks that they can use to take 1 week in the sun? You've got to have one of those fancy lockdown jobs like a politician, a bureaucrat, a teachers union member, or something like that. This is, I hate to sound like a Marxist, Andrew, but this is very classist, this lockdown. Let's say you have a factory job, you can't get out of the factory or the office from 9 to 5, you need to pick the kids up from school, make dinner for them, and then do your shopping or whatever at 7, 8, 9 p.m. This is a regressive curfew. Put aside the fact that it's against civil liberties, there's no scientific basis for it. They just want to punish us.
And the effect on business as well, because a lot of the small businesses that have somehow managed to survive lockdown 1.0 and are in the midst of lockdown 2.0, trying to make their best go at things, they will have to shut down and restrict hours severely. Businesses will have to restrict hours if there's a curfew. Now, imagine you're a business owner who is allowed to stay open in some form, and you don't have employees because you can't afford them. You've had to lay them off. So you're at your store from open to close. Where are you supposed to go to get groceries after you're done work?
Yeah.
These 24-hour grocery stores that have become the lifeblood of some communities, well, those can't exist anymore because, oh, well, if you're out after 8 p.m. in Quebec or whatever time Ontario sets, if they go down this terrible road, that is going to be illegal. So the idea here that all of a sudden everyone's work schedules and work days have to be as flexible as they are for the rulers is the expectation. And there's a real point of privilege here. And again, I'm sounding like you as we talk about these terms that people on our side of things don't usually talk about. But very few people considerably, if you look at the population, have the privilege of being able to work remotely and work from home. I'm very fortunate that I get to. I know you've got a studio, but if you really needed to, you might be able to do some of your work from home or remotely, at least for a time. A lot of people don't. You can't be a grocery store cashier. You can't run a little convenience store. You can't work in a factory. You can't do all of these jobs, which occupy the majority of the Canadian workforce remotely. So you're right. There's a big problem that these people actually don't matter to the government.
Yeah. You know, I was looking at Quebec bringing in the curfew, and again, the question is, where's the science? Is this virus, is it like a vampire that only comes out at night? You know, the Hollywood vampire, when there's break of day, the vampire must, like the idea that the virus suddenly is dangerous at night. There is no science to it. The consensus that I've been reading out of Quebec is that it's not about a scientific finding that the virus strikes at night. It's just to bring home the seriousness of it. Basically, to show people how mad the government is. We're going to punish you to get your attention. I haven't seen any medical science either in Canada or in the UK where they've had curfews or in Australia where they've had curfews that shows there's any epidemiological science behind this. And I think it's just politicians flexing muscles because they can. They're the ruling class.
I do agree that this is not something with a medical basis, but I actually think it does something a little bit worse than what you're describing about just there to put the fear of God into people. And that's that it allows enforcement in a way that we don't necessarily have under the current restrictions. Because right now, you're still allowed to drive down the street because you could be going to church if you're one of the 10 people that are allowed in the building. You could be going to the grocery store. You could be doing something essential. Now, police will have an opportunity to stop you and question you and force you to justify what's always been a right, which is to drive down the roads that your taxes pay for. Now, law enforcement has a mechanism and a supposed justification to force you to justify your own actions as a supposedly free person. And that's the real danger of this curfew, is that it's now making enforcement a lot easier by criminalizing a lot more things, benign activities. If I'm driving around in my car for an evening, people in the country grow up doing this. You just go for a drive. Yeah. You're not actually near anyone. You're not within breathing distance of anyone, but this will no longer be allowed. And one of the things, just from a pragmatic perspective, if you shrink the hours in the day that you're allowed to do something, you're actually congesting stores more. You're congesting grocery stores more because now, well, instead of having 12 opening hours that people can shop in, you have to cram those same number of customers into 10 hours or 8 hours, which is just absurd. We are not actually doing anything other than theater, but it's not just about optics. There's a real enforcement challenge that comes about here.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.